Montana Territory, September 1878, the night she ran. The wind howled through the timber like it wanted her bones. Sierra Whitlow did not look back at the trading post. Her bare feet slapped hard against pine needles and frozen mud, her lungs burning with fear and cold. She had nothing, no cloak, no shoes, no food. Just bruises on her arms, a split lip, and the knowledge that if she stayed, she would never leave alive. The men had dragged her from her wagon 3 weeks ago after her father died suddenly of fever near the Gallatin River. They took her for trade, for chores, for whatever else they wanted. The postmaster, a man named Clay Burris, called her property and locked her inside a dark storeroom at night. She wasn't even 20 yet. Now she was free, or close to it. Sierra stumbled down the slope, scraping her palms on icy rocks. Her breath came in clouds, and her thin dress clung wet to her legs from the snowmelt creek she had crossed. She kept her hands pressed tight to her ribs where they ached from last night's beating. Stars blinked overhead between the fir branches, but she didn't trust them. She didn't trust anything but the trees and the dark. She dropped to her knees behind a fallen log when she heard hooves. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She held her breath. The rider came fast but pulled up smooth just ahead. The horse, a paint gelding, was calm. The man on its back wore a long doeskin coat, his black hair braided and tied with red cloth. He dismounted without a word, his moccasins silent over the frost-bitten ground. He saw her. Sierra scrambled backward. "Please do not take me back," she gasped, voice raw. "I will die before I go back." The man raised a hand, palm outward. "I won't take you back," he said in a quiet, steady voice. She blinked, shivering, too weak to run again. "My name is Roran Chaska," he said. "I guide people through these mountains, help them find their way. What happened to you?" Sierra's cracked lips trembled. "I escaped from the Gallatin trading post. They kept me locked up." I have nothing." Roran's dark eyes didn't waver. "You are not nothing." She collapsed into the dirt, her body giving out. He knelt beside her, pulled his coat from his shoulders, and wrapped it around her like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I will keep you safe." Those words, simple, firm, were the first warmth she had felt in weeks. Roran built a fire in a clearing a few hundred steps uphill. He gave her a thick hide to sit on and handed her a strip of dried venison from his bag. She ate slow, her hands shaking. He said little, just worked in quiet rhythm, feeding the fire, brushing down his horse, checking the sky. When she looked at him, she did not see pity, just calm. "I do not know where to go," she said after a while. "Then stay with me," he said. "I travel east in 2 days. I can take you through safe ground." She studied his face. He was maybe in his late 20s. Strong shoulders, a scar across his left cheekbone, but kind eyes. She nodded. "Thank you." He only nodded back like it was already decided. They traveled 2 days on foot. Roran gave her his warmer boots, insisting he had another pair in his saddlebag. He walked ahead when the trail was narrow, cutting branches out of her way. When she stumbled, he stopped and waited. He never touched her without asking, never looked at her like she was weak. On the 3rd day, they reached a high ridge above the trees. The air was sharp, but the sun was out. "I was not born for this," she said, breath hitching. "I was raised in a town with porch steps and cotton sheets." He smiled a little. "And yet you escaped barefoot through the woods in the night. You are stronger than you know." She turned to him, tears she didn't expect stinging her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Roran looked down at the valley. "Because once, someone helped me when I had nothing. I remember what that felt like." They made camp early that night beside a small lake. Sierra gathered dry pine needles while Roran set the fire. He offered her a carved wooden cup of boiled root tea, and she took it carefully. "You could have left me," she said. "I could have," he agreed, "but you did not." No, the fire crackled between them. She watched his face, the way the glow danced across his cheekbones and the bridge of his nose. "Does Roran mean something?" "It means walker in my language. My mother gave it to me because I never stayed still." She smiled faintly. "Fits." He tilted his head. "And Sierra," my mother liked the way it sounded. "She died when I was 10. My father tried to raise me right. He taught me how to read trail signs, how to shoot straight. But he was sick a long time before he died." Roran nodded, quiet. "I buried him by the river. I do not think I have cried since." She looked down at her hands. Not crying is not the same as not feeling, Roran said. That night she slept beside the fire wrapped in his coat. He sat close, his back against a log, keeping watch. When she woke near dawn, she found him staring at the sky, his expression thoughtful. She sat up. "Did you sleep?" "A little." She hesitated before asking, "Do you always help strangers?" "No," he said. "Only the ones who look at me like you do." She blinked. "How do I look at you?" "Like you trust me." Sierra stared at him for a long time. Her heart beat faster. She didn't know what to say. He reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You have been through hell. You do not need to say anything." She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. "I do not know what comes next. I will help you find it," he said. And in her chest, something that had been locked tight for weeks, maybe for years, began to loosen. By the time they reached the lower valley, the air had turned warm enough to pull the damp from Sierra's dress and leave the frost only in the shadows. The trees opened into wide swaths of meadow, pale gold with drying grass and dotted with elk sign. Roran walked beside her now, the horse trailing behind with the packs. He offered her space but not distance. They passed a line of cottonwoods bent over a creek. The water was clear and shallow, and Sierra paused to kneel and rinse her face. Her wrists were thin beneath the sleeves, but she moved with more steadiness than she had 2 days ago. Roran crouched nearby, resting his arms on his knees, watching the way the light moved through the leaves. "What made you choose this trail?" she asked, drying her hands on her skirt. "It's less traveled than the others. No fur convoys this way this late in the season," she nodded, thoughtful. "You've done this a long time." "I know every pass from here to the Judith Basin," he said. "My uncle taught me when I was a boy." She studied his profile, the way his jaw set when he talked about kin. "Is he still living?" "No, he was killed in 71. 2 men from St. Louis shot him over a horse they claimed was theirs." They walked free. His voice didn't change, but his eyes followed the current. Sierra didn't speak right away. "You carry him with you." "I carry a lot of people," he said. They walked on. The trail descended into a narrow gorge where the wind pressed close and the stone walls held warmth from the sun. Roran led her to a cave set back from the path, hidden behind a curtain of fir branches. Inside, the floor was dry dirt, smooth from use. An old fire pit sat near the far wall, ringed with charred stones. "I keep this place for when I'm between runs," he said, pulling aside the branches. "It's quiet, safe." Sierra stepped in, brushing her fingers along the rock. "Did you build it up?" "I found it. The Blackfeet used to shelter here when they hunted the buffalo herds." He glanced at her. "Would you stay here a while, until you decide what road you want?" She set down her bundle carefully. "No one will find me. No one who matters." That night they cooked dried corn and smoked rabbit over the fire. Roran handed her a folded blanket from his pack, worn but clean. She tucked it around her legs, sitting cross-legged across the flames from him. "Do you have people still?" she asked, voice soft. "My mother lives near the Tongue River. She remarried after my father died. I haven't seen her in 2 winters." "Why not?" She wanted a quiet life. "I didn't." Sierra shifted, the firelight catching the edge of her cheek. "Did you love her?" "Yes, but I couldn't be what she needed. I came west when I was 17, found work breaking horses, running messages, learned when to speak and when not to." "You don't talk much," she said, not unkindly. Roran smiled faintly. "Most things worth saying take time." She looked into the fire. "What do you think I'm worth?" He didn't answer right away. She lifted her eyes to him and found his already waiting. "You're worth the days it takes to heal," he said. "The quiet hours, the long walk." Her breath caught. "What if I never become whole again?" "You're not broken. You've just been handled wrong." She pressed her fingers to her eyes, rough with soot. "I don't know who I am without someone trying to claim me." "You'll learn," he said. "No one here owns you." The next morning she woke to birdsong. Roran had already gone down to the creek and returned with a string of fresh fish. She helped gut them with a flint blade, her hands moving steadier than before. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Later, she stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the wind move through the trees. He came up beside her, close enough to feel the heat off his coat. "I think I want to stay," she said. He didn't move. "Then we'll build something here." She turned to him, her face open in a way it hadn't been since he found her. "You'd stay too?" I've walked long enough. Maybe it's time. Sierra reached for his hand, not out of fear this time, but choice. His fingers curled around hers. Neither of them spoke, but the air between them shifted, something new taking root, quiet and sure. They stood like that until the sun passed behind the ridge and the wind settled for the night. The first frost came before the leaves turned. Sierra woke to a silver sheen across the grass and the distant call of cranes flying south. Roran had gone to check his traps along the ridge to the east, and the cave felt still without his quiet presence. She wrapped herself in the wool blanket and stepped into the morning, her breath rising before her in pale clouds. The lake below the slope had begun to ice at its edges. She walked the path he'd worn down with his boots, following it until she reached the small corral he'd built from pine trunks. Inside, his gelding shifted and huffed, flicking its tail. She reached out and touched its shoulder, remembering how he'd said the animal had carried him through 3 winters already. By the time Roran returned, the sun had crested the trees and melted the frost from the stone. He carried a sling of rabbits over one shoulder, his coat dark with cold dew. "You were gone longer than usual," she said, her voice clearer than it had been in days. "Found a snare torn apart," he replied, setting the rabbits down. "Could have been a wolf." "Might be more than one." Her eyes followed his hands as he skinned the first rabbit. "Do they come this close? Not often. But if they're hungry enough, they'll push down into the lower hills." She sat beside him and picked up the second carcass. "Show me how." He paused, then passed her the knife. "Hold it here. Cut with the grain, not against." Her fingers worked with care as he guided her. The chill stung her knuckles, but she didn't stop. When they finished, he lit the fire again, and they strung the meat over a spit made from greenwood. "You said you used to break horses," she said, watching the flames curl around the meat. "I did, for a rancher near the mussel shell. Rough land, but good grazing." "Why did you leave?" His sons shot at a group of Lakota riders passing through, claimed they were trespassing. "I tried to stop them. Didn't work." She nodded slowly. "So you left." "They burned my gear the next morning. I took the horse and left before sunup." Sierra looked at him, a new understanding settling behind her gaze. "You keep walking because the still places never held you right." Roran didn't answer, but he met her eyes. That afternoon, they worked together to gather deadwood and dig a storage pit for the smoked meat. She tied her hair back with a strip of leather and rolled her sleeves, her skin reddened by the wind. Roran watched her move with purpose, not needing to ask what she could manage. When the sun dipped low again, they sat on the flat stone just outside the cave, sharing the last of the day's broth. The wind had calmed and the trees stood still, their branches casting long shadows across the slope. "You said I should decide what road I want," she said, setting her cup down. "What if I don't want a road anymore?" He turned his head toward her, waiting. "What if I want to stay here, with you?" Roran didn't speak right away. He drew in a breath, slow and measured. "I would want that," he said, "but I won't be the one to name it." Sierra's voice came softer. "Then let me." He watched her. The quiet between them held weight but not hesitation. "I don't know what it means yet," she said, "but I know it feels like something growing instead of breaking." He reached for her hand, and this time she met him halfway. That night, after the fire had burned low and the stars came out in bands across the sky, he brought an extra blanket and laid it beside hers. He didn't touch her, didn't move closer than she allowed. But when she turned beneath the quilt and reached for him, he was already there. "I feel safe here," she whispered. "Not just from men or wolves, from the way the world wants to use people up." "You are not something to be used," he said. "You're someone who survived." She closed her eyes, her head resting against his arm. "I don't want to keep surviving. I want to live." "Then we will," he said. And in that quiet space, beneath the cold stars and the breath of pine, Sierra understood what it meant to be offered everything, not in grand promises or loud declarations, but in shared silence, steady hands, and the kind of presence that asked for nothing but truth. By mid-October, Sierra had learned how to lay a snare line and mend a torn moccasin without pricking her thumb. Her hands no longer trembled from the cold, and her voice, when she used it, carried steadier through the trees. The cave had become a home in quiet ways through the smoke stain above the fire pit, the bundles of dried herbs she tied and hung along the back wall, The way Roran never crossed the sleeping space she marked unless she reached for him first. That morning, she was crouched beside the rock shelf where she'd started keeping their dried meat wrapped in muslin, sorting through the last few strips of elk. Roran returned from the southern ridge with a length of birch bark tucked under his arm. "You've walked that far before sunup?" she asked, brushing her skirt against her knees as she rose. "Found a stand of dry trees with good pitch," he said. "Could use it to seal the roof if we build one." She wiped her hands and stepped outside with him. "You think we should stay through winter? I don't see sense in chasing roads that don't offer better than this." He set down the bark, then looked toward the shallow slope where the trees thinned. "There's a flat stretch past the lake, high ground. We could raise a frame there. If we start before the frost sets in deep, it'll hold." Sierra crossed her arms and took in the land. "I've only ever lived in places others built for me." He didn't meet that with anything soft. "Then this one can be yours." They spent the rest of the day clearing brush and dragging fallen limbs from the edge of the woods. Roran marked out the frame with stones, measuring the length with his stride. Sierra dug the perimeter trench while he trimmed the posts. They spoke little, each movement part of something understood without needing words. When dusk fell, she stood back and looked at the square they'd laid together. Her hair was coming loose and dark earth streaked her dress, but her eyes were sharp. "You believe in permanence?" she asked, her voice low. "I believe in what we build with our own hands," he said. She turned to him slowly. "And in what we choose when no one's forcing us." "Yes." She stepped closer, not rushed. "Then I choose you." His hand found the curve of her hip steady and sure, and she leaned into him without hesitation. They stood in the cooling light, the frame of their future drawn in bare earth around them, the wind soft through the pine. That night, they didn't return to the cave. They laid their bedding beneath the stars on the ridge above the clearing, the scent of crushed juniper thick in the air. Roran banked a small fire, and Sierra curled against his side, her head beneath his chin. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere after what happened," she said. "They took everything that tied me to the world." He ran his thumb along her knuckles. "Then we'll tie you to something new. I want to plant things, not just survive on what we find. Spring comes sooner than you think on this side of the ridge." She smiled, small but certain. "Then I'll be ready for it." He kissed the side of her temple, slow and deliberate, and they fell asleep with the sound of the wind in the branches and the warmth of the fire at their feet. The world hadn't given her peace, but he had, and she'd built her place beside it, not taken, not begged for, only earned and chosen. The walls rose slowly, one log at a time, notched and fit by Roran's practiced hands and held steady by Sierra's. She moved with purpose now, no longer needing to ask what came next. Her strength had found shape in labor, in the sweat that lined her brow and the calluses forming along her palms. The cabin was modest, no more than 2 rooms in size, but every beam held the weight of their quiet intention. Snow hadn't yet fallen, but the wind had taken on a sharpness that warned of what was coming. They had just finished setting the rafters when Roran stepped back and rolled his shoulder, his shirt damp with effort. Sierra squinted up at the pitch of the roof, then down at the stack of pine shakes she'd split earlier that week. "You think we'll finish before the ground freezes?" she asked, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "I've seen cabins half this size take twice as long," Roran said. "But they didn't have you." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened. "I didn't know I could be proud of something like this." He passed her the water gourd and leaned against the frame, watching the sun ease behind the trees. "You earned every board of it." Later, by lantern light, Sierra sat on the floor of the cave threading sinew through a tear in the saddle blanket while Roran sharpened his axe. The rhythm of stone against steel was steady, and neither spoke for a while. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the stone wall. "I used to think I was only made of what had happened to me," she said without looking up. "Like I was just stitched together from the bad parts." Roran set the axe aside. "And now, I think I'm more than that. I think I get to decide what I'm made of next." He crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her. "You're not a thing to be remade. You're someone finding her shape." She looked up then, the needle paused in her hand. "You see me clearer than I see myself." "I see you because you let me," he said. "That's no small thing." She reached for his hand, fingers cool from the air. I want to build more than just a roof over us. I want to build a life." His thumb brushed across her knuckles once. "Then we do it together." They moved into the cabin before the first frost settled deep into the soil. The hearth crackled with dry aspen, and the smoke curled smooth through the chimney Roran had mortared with creek stones. Sierra lined the shelves with jars of dried berries and roots, folded the quilts she had sewn from salvaged wool. On the second night, they sat at the small table he'd built from a slab of cottonwood, 2 tin cups between them, snow beginning to drift outside. "The first place, that's mine," she said, glancing around the room. "Ours," he said. She smiled, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small carved token. "I made this for you." He turned it in his palm, a narrow piece of bone, shaped like a feather strung on a leather loop. "It's not much," she said, suddenly uncertain. "It's everything," he answered, tying it around his wrist. That night, they lay close beneath a quilt stitched with uneven seams, the warmth between them steady. Roran pressed his lips to her shoulder, her skin still scented with the lavender she dried and crushed into a pouch beneath their bedding. "You're not afraid anymore," he said softly. "I'm not alone anymore," she answered. Winter came hard. Snow settled in thick banks, and the wind carved paths through the pines. They kept each other warm with laughter and labor, clearing drifts from the roof, tending traps, binding wounds when needed. Sierra learned to read the landscape the way Roran did, with instinct and patience. He taught her to track by broken twigs and shallow prints, to listen for the hush that meant danger. In late February, she found him outside, carving a cradleboard from aspen. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're sure?" He nodded once. "I've been sure since the leaves turned." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I never thought I'd greet something new with joy again." "You're not who you were," he said. "And this child will never know a world without love." They named him Illy, born under a sky full of stars and the hush of late spring snow melting into the earth. Sierra held him to her chest and wept, not from pain, but from the fullness of it, Roran's hand resting gently at her back, steady as ever. Years passed with the rhythm of seasons. The cabin grew fuller, more shelves, more tools, more stories. Roran planted rows of beans and squash in the clearing. Sierra taught Illy letters from the small Bible her father once carried, its spine worn and pages soft. One autumn, as the wind bent the trees and the smell of smoke curled through the eaves, Illy ran through the door with a bird's feather in his hand. "Mama, Papa," he said breathlessly. "Look what I found." Sierra took it and tucked it behind his ear. "You've got a sharp eye, just like your father." Roran smiled from the hearth where he was mending a boot. "He's got your fire, too." Later that evening, after Illy slept beneath a quilt Sierra had sewn from old shirts and scraps, Roran pulled her close on the bench by the fire. Her hair had grown long again, braided down her back. "You never asked me to stay," she murmured. "You were never meant to be asked," he said. "You were meant to be known." She rested her head against his chest. "It still surprises me how much peace fits in such a quiet life." "It's not quiet," he said. "It just doesn't need to shout." Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the hush of memory. Inside, the fire glowed steady, and the home they'd built held warm against the cold. Together they stayed. Through seasons, through storms, through the long, calm days that followed. Not because they had no other place to go, but because they had chosen this one, this life, this love, this path walked side by side.